Have you ever left a conversation feeling confused, guilty, or strangely responsible for something you did not actually do? Maybe someone denied something you clearly remembered. Maybe they made you feel selfish for setting a boundary. Maybe they went silent until you apologized, even though you were the one who felt hurt. And the most disturbing part is this: manipulation does not always look aggressive. Sometimes it sounds calm. Sometimes it looks romantic. Sometimes it hides behind concern. Sometimes it comes from people who say they love you. That is what makes emotional manipulation so powerful. It does not always attack you directly. It slowly changes the way you see yourself, your memories, your emotions, and even your own instincts. You do not wake up one day suddenly controlled. It happens little by little. One conversation, one denial, one uncomfortable silence, one compliment that feels too intense, one guilt trip disguised as disappointment. And before you realize it, you're no longer asking, "Is this person treating me fairly?" You are asking, "Am I the problem?" In this video, we're going to break down some of the most common manipulation tactics people use in relationships, families, friendships, and even at work. And once you recognize these patterns, they become much harder to fall for. Because manipulation survives in confusion, but clarity gives you your power back. The first tactic is gaslighting. Gaslighting is one of the most talked about manipulation tactics, but many people still do not fully understand how subtle it can be. It is not always someone screaming, insulting, or obviously lying. Sometimes gaslighting looks like a calm voice telling you, "That never happened." Sometimes it sounds like, "You are too sensitive." Sometimes it comes as a small laugh, a dismissive look, or a sentence that makes you question your own reaction. Gaslighting happens when someone slowly makes you doubt your own reality. You remember a situation clearly, but they deny it with total confidence. You explain how something made you feel, but they twist it into proof that you were dramatic. You try to hold them accountable, but somehow the conversation ends with you apologizing. And the danger is not only in the lie itself. The danger is in the repetition. One time you might ignore it. Twice you might feel confused. But after months or years of this pattern, you may start doubting your memory, your emotions, your judgment, and even your basic perception of reality. That is why gaslighting is so damaging. It does not just attack what happened. It attacks your trust in yourself. You begin to think, "Maybe I'm misunderstood. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I really am too sensitive. Maybe I cannot trust my own mind." And once someone gets you to that point, controlling you becomes much easier. Because if they can make you doubt your version of reality, they can replace it with theirs. Gaslighting can happen in romantic relationships, families, friendships, workplaces, and even social groups. The pattern is almost always the same: confusion, denial, self-doubt, and silence. So, how do you protect yourself? You start getting clear. Write things down when something feels wrong. Pay attention to patterns, not isolated moments. Trust the emotional impact something had on you, even if someone tries to explain it away. You do not need permission to believe your own experience. And most importantly, stop over-explaining yourself to someone who is committed to misunderstanding you. Because the moment you stop begging someone to validate your reality, you begin to take your power back. The second tactic is love bombing. Love bombing can feel amazing in the beginning, and that is exactly what makes it dangerous. It starts with intensity, not real intimacy, not real trust, not real emotional connection. Intensity. Someone suddenly makes you the center of their world. They text constantly. They compliment you endlessly. They say you are different from everyone else. They talk about the future too soon. They make you feel chosen, special, almost addicted to their attention. And at first, it feels incredible. Because who does not want to feel wanted? Who does not want to feel seen, adored, and desired? But love bombing is not always about love. Sometimes it is about creating emotional dependency. The person moves too fast because speed makes it harder for you to think clearly. They flood you with affection before trust has time to form. They create a fantasy version of connection before you have enough evidence to know who they really are. And once you are hooked on the emotional high, the shift begins. They pull back. They become distant. They stop giving the same attention. They turn cold, vague, or unpredictable. And suddenly, you start chasing the version of them you met in the beginning. You wonder what you did wrong. You try harder. You become more available. You lower your standards. You accept less, hoping the old version of them will come back. But here is the painful truth. Sometimes that version was never real. It was the bait. Love bombing often appears in toxic relationships, narcissistic dynamics, and trauma bonds. It creates a cycle where affection becomes a reward, distance becomes punishment, and you become emotionally trained to chase approval. Real love does not need to rush you. Real connection allows space. It respects time. It grows through consistency, not pressure. So, how do you protect yourself from love bombing? Slow down. Do not judge someone only by how intensely they want you in the beginning. Watch how consistent they are over time. Look at patterns, not promises. A person can say beautiful things and still be unsafe. A person can give you attention and still be trying to control you. Real love does not feel like emotional fireworks followed by confusion. It feels steady. And if someone tries to build forever before trust even has a foundation, it may not be romance. It may be a performance. The third tactic is guilt tripping. Guilt tripping is one of the most common forms of emotional manipulation because it often does not look like manipulation at all. It can sound soft. It can sound disappointed. It can even sound loving. A person may not directly say, "Do what I want." Instead, they say something like, "After everything I have done for you," or "I guess I just expected more from you," or "Do not worry about me. I am used to being ignored." And suddenly, you feel terrible. You feel selfish. You feel cold. You feel like you failed some invisible test. That is how guilt tripping works. It is not always about what you did. It is about making you feel responsible for someone else's disappointment, discomfort, or emotional reaction. And this can be especially powerful if you are empathetic, because empathetic people naturally care about how others feel. They notice tension. They feel the silence. They pick up on disappointment quickly. So when someone uses guilt as a tool, an empathetic person may immediately try to fix the situation, even when they did nothing wrong. They apologize just to restore peace. They say yes just to avoid hurting someone. They ignore their own boundary because someone else made that boundary feel cruel. But there is a difference between real guilt and manipulated guilt. Real guilt comes from your values. It tells you, "I did something that goes against who I want to be." Manipulated guilt comes from someone else's control. It tells you, "If you do not do what I want, you are a bad person." That difference matters, because boundaries are not cruelty. Saying no does not make you selfish. Changing your mind does not make you disloyal. Choosing yourself does not mean you do not care about others. So, how do you deal with guilt tripping? Pause before reacting. Ask yourself, did I actually do something wrong? Or am I being made to feel wrong because I disappointed someone? That one question can save you from a lot of emotional manipulation. You are allowed to care about someone and still say no. You are allowed to be kind without becoming controlled. And you're allowed to hold a boundary even when someone does not like it. The fourth tactic is triangulation. Triangulation happens when someone pulls a third person into a conflict instead of speaking to you directly. It creates a social triangle. And suddenly, the issue is no longer between you and one person. Now there's someone else involved. You hear things like, "Everyone agrees with me," or "Sarah thinks you are overreacting too," or "Other people have noticed this about you." And immediately, the pressure changes. Now you do not feel like you are having a conversation. You feel like you're defending yourself in front of an invisible jury. That is the power of triangulation. It makes you feel outnumbered. Instead of dealing with the actual issue, you start worrying about what other people think. You begin questioning whether you really are the difficult one. You feel embarrassed, exposed, and pressure to back down. But triangulation is not healthy communication. It is strategy. When someone triangulates, they are often not trying to solve the problem. They're trying to win the narrative. This happens a lot in toxic families. A parent complains about one child to another instead of speaking directly. A sibling is used as a messenger. One person becomes the problem, while others are quietly recruited to take sides. It also happens in romantic relationships. You can say, if there's a problem between us, I want to talk about it directly. Or, I'm not going to respond to what other people supposedly said. I'm here to talk to you. That kind of clarity breaks the triangle. You do not need to defend yourself against people who are not even in the conversation. Healthy communication is direct. Manipulation hides behind third parties. And if someone refuses to speak to you directly, you do not have to keep playing inside their triangle. The fifth tactic is the white knight dynamic. The white knight looks like a hero. They show up with concern. They offer solutions. They seem protective. They make you feel like someone finally understands what you're going through. And sometimes, help is genuine. But in toxic dynamics, the white knight does not just help with problems. They may quietly create problems so they can be the one to fix them. They might stir up conflict behind the scenes, then comfort you when you feel hurt. They might weaken your confidence, then offer themselves as your source of strength. They might warn you that other people are against you, then position themselves as the only person you can trust. They build the fire, then arrive with the water. And because they look helpful, it can be hard to recognize what is happening. Their control is disguised as care. But the hidden message is this: you need me. That is what gives them power. A true supporter helps you become stronger. A toxic white knight needs you to stay dependent. They do not want you fully confident, fully independent, or fully clear. Because if you no longer need saving, they lose their role. You may notice that when you start healing, growing, setting boundaries, or solving your own problems, they become uncomfortable. They may withdraw. They may act hurt. They may call you ungrateful. They may make you feel guilty for not needing them the same way anymore. That is a sign the help was never completely free. So, how do you recognize this pattern? Look closely. Does this person support your independence? Or do they subtly keep you dependent? Do they help you stand up? Or do they need you to stay on the ground? Do they calm the chaos? Or do they somehow always appear right after chaos begins? Real support gives you strength. Manipulative support gives you a cage and calls it protection. You can accept help without giving away your power. You do not need to be rescued. You need respect, clarity, and room to stand on your own. The sixth tactic is the silent treatment. Silence can be healthy. Sometimes people need space to calm down. Sometimes a pause prevents a conversation from becoming destructive. Sometimes silence is simply emotional regulation. But the silent treatment is different. The silent treatment is not space. It is punishment. It happens when someone uses silence to control your behavior. They become cold, distant, unreachable. They refuse to explain what is wrong. They ignore your messages. They withdraw affection. They make the relationship feel unsafe until you give in. And the worst part is that you may start chasing them. You replay everything you said. You wonder what you did wrong. You apologize just to end the discomfort. You become smaller, softer, more careful. Not because you were wrong, but because the silence becomes unbearable. That is why the silent treatment is so effective. It creates emotional uncertainty. And uncertainty makes people desperate for resolution. The person using silence does not have to explain, negotiate, or take accountability. They simply disappear emotionally and wait for you to break. The message is clear. I control when you feel safe with me. That is not communication. That is control. In healthy relationships, people may need time before talking, but they communicate that need clearly. They say, I am upset and need some time. Let's talk later. That is different from disappearing, punishing, and forcing the other person to guess. So how do you respond? Do not chase the silence. Name what's happening calmly. You can say, I am open to talking when you are ready, but I will not be punished with silence. Then step back. Do not beg someone to communicate with you. Communication is a two-way street. And if someone only speaks when you surrender, they are not looking for understanding. They are looking for control. The seventh tactic is breadcrumbing. Breadcrumbing is emotional minimalism. It happens when someone gives you just enough attention to keep you interested, but never enough consistency to build something real. They send a random message. They react to your story. They compliment you out of nowhere. They say they miss you. They suggest meeting up someday. But when it comes to actual effort, clarity, or commitment, everything becomes vague. Maybe later. Soon. One day. I've just been busy, and you stay stuck waiting. Breadcrumbing is like emotional clickbait. It gives you a small hit of hope, just enough to keep you checking, wondering, and expecting that maybe this time things will change. But they usually do not. Because the purpose of breadcrumbing is not connection. It is access. The person gets your attention without responsibility. They keep you emotionally available while staying emotionally unavailable. They do not fully choose you, but they do not fully release you either. And that middle space can become addictive because uncertainty keeps the brain searching for answers. You start interpreting small signs. You analyze their messages. You wait for replies. You hold on to tiny moments because they feel like proof that something is still there. But consistency speaks louder than occasional charm. A person who truly wants to be present does not leave you starving for clarity. Breadcrumbing can happen in dating, friendships, and even professional relationships. Sometimes it is intentional. Sometimes it comes from insecurity, fear, or emotional immaturity. But the impact is the same. You're left in limbo while the other person keeps the power. So, how do you deal with breadcrumbing? Stop chasing crumbs. Look at the pattern. If someone's interest only appears in flashes, if they keep you guessing, if their words create hope but their actions create confusion, you do not need to decode it forever. You can simply decide it is not enough. You deserve consistency, not emotional leftovers. The 8th tactic is DARVO. DARVO is one of the most disorienting manipulation tactics because it flips reality in real time. DARVO stands for deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. It usually happens when you try to hold someone accountable. You bring up something that hurt you. You try to speak calmly. You explain the issue. And then the pattern begins. First, they deny it. That never happened. You're making things up. You are exaggerating. Then they attack. They criticize your tone. They bring up your past. They accuse you of being dramatic. They focus on how you said it instead of what they did. And then comes the reversal. Suddenly, they are the victim. Now they're the one being attacked. They're the one suffering. They're the one who can never do anything right. And somehow, the conversation that started with your pain becomes a conversation about their pain. That is DARVO. It is narrative control. It takes accountability and turns it into self-defense. It takes your truth and makes it look like cruelty. It takes the person who caused harm and places them in the role of the wounded one. And if you're on the receiving end, it can be incredibly confusing. You may start defending your tone instead of your boundary. You may start comforting them instead of addressing what hurt you. You may leave the conversation feeling guilty for speaking up at all. That is why DARVO works. It buries the original issue under emotional chaos. So how do you respond? Do not take the bait. Stay with the original point. You can say, I am willing to talk about your feelings, but I do not want the original issue to disappear. Or, we can discuss how this conversation feels, but we still need to address what happened. Keep returning to the facts. DARVO depends on confusion. It fails when you stay clear. Because accountability is not an attack. And telling the truth about harm is not cruelty. When you begin recognizing these manipulation tactics, something important changes. You stop personalizing every uncomfortable reaction. You stop assuming someone else's disappointment means you did something wrong. You stop confusing intensity with love, silence with power, guilt with responsibility, and confusion with truth. And you begin asking better questions. Is this person communicating or controlling? Are they helping me grow or keeping me dependent? Are they taking accountability or flipping the story? Do I feel safe to be honest, or do I feel trained to stay quiet? These questions matter because manipulation often works best when you're too overwhelmed to name what is happening. But once you can name the pattern, you can step outside of it. You do not have to win every argument. You do not have to prove your reality to someone committed to twisting it. You do not have to chase people who only give you crumbs. You do not have to apologize just because someone knows how to make you feel guilty. And you do not have to stay in conversations where your truth keeps getting buried. The goal is not to become paranoid. Not everyone who makes a mistake is manipulating you. Not every silence is punishment. Not every intense beginning is love bombing. Not every disagreement is gaslighting. But patterns reveal what isolated moments can hide. So watch the pattern. Watch how someone responds when you set a boundary. Watch how they react when you say no. Watch whether they can take accountability without attacking you. Watch whether their care makes you stronger or more dependent. Because healthy relationships do not require you to abandon yourself in order to keep the peace. They do not make you question your sanity every time you speak. They do not punish your boundaries. They do not turn your kindness into a debt. Real connection feels safe enough for honesty. And the more clearly you see manipulation, the less power it has over you. So protect your clarity. Trust your instincts. Write things down when you need to. Slow down when something feels too intense. And remember this, you do not need someone else's permission to believe your own experience. If this video helped you see a pattern you have lived through, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and watch the next video to understand more about the hidden psychology behind human behavior. Because the more you understand the mind, the harder it becomes for anyone to control yours.